A millionaire catches a poor boy dancing with his paralyzed daughter. What happened surprised everyone, and when he discovered who the boy was, his tears fell. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The rain hammered against the windows of the black Mercedes as Robert Mitchell pulled into the parking lot of Sacred Heart Children's Hospital. At 40, he'd built an empire worth $200 million, but none of that mattered when his 6-year-old daughter Emma was having one of her bad days. The doctors said the spinal injury from the accident would never heal. Emma would never walk again, but Robert refused to accept that finality. Today's appointment was with yet another specialist, another glimmer of hope he desperately chased. "Daddy, look!" Emma's voice rang out from her wheelchair, pointing toward the hospital's small garden area, visible through the glass doors. Robert followed her gaze and froze. There, dancing in the rain, was a small boy who couldn't have been older than 7. His clothes were torn and dirty, his dark hair matted against his head. But what stopped Robert's heart wasn't the boy's obvious poverty, it was what he was doing. The child was performing an elaborate dance, spinning and leaping with pure joy, completely oblivious to the cold rain soaking him to the bone. His movements were fluid, almost professional, like he'd been trained by the best choreographers money could buy. "He's beautiful, Daddy," Emma whispered, pressing her face against the window. "He dances like the angels in my dreams." Robert's throat tightened. His daughter hadn't shown interest in anything since the accident 6 months ago. She'd retreated into a shell of silence and sadness that no amount of therapy had been able to crack. "Can we go watch him?" Emma asked, her blue eyes sparkling for the first time in months. Against his better judgment, Robert wheeled Emma outside under the covered walkway. The boy noticed them immediately and stopped dancing, his large brown eyes wide with surprise and fear. "I'm sorry, sir," the boy stammered, backing away. "I wasn't bothering nobody, I swear. I'll leave." "Wait," Emma called out, her voice stronger than Robert had heard it in months. "Please don't go. You dance like magic." The boy hesitated, looking between Robert's expensive suit and Emma's wheelchair. You like watching me dance?" "I love it," Emma said simply. "What's your name?" Tommy," the boy replied, still wary but no longer backing away. "I'm Emma. This is my daddy, Robert. Do you live around here, Tommy?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Tommy's eyes darted to the alley behind the hospital, then back to Emma's innocent face. "I live wherever the rain doesn't fall too hard," Tommy said quietly. Robert felt something crack inside his chest. This child was homeless, probably had been for God knows how long, and yet he was out here dancing in the rain like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Tommy," Robert found himself saying, "would you like to come inside where it's warm?" The boy's eyes widened with terror. "I can't, sir. They'll call the police, and then they'll take me to the bad place." "What bad place?" Robert asked gently, but Tommy was already backing away, shaking his head frantically. "I gotta go. I'm sorry I bothered you and the pretty girl." "You didn't bother us!" Emma called out desperately. "Tommy, please!" But the boy was already disappearing into the maze of alleys behind the hospital, leaving Robert and Emma staring after him in stunned silence. As they sat there, Robert noticed something glinting in the puddle where Tommy had been dancing. He walked over and picked up a small, waterlogged photograph. When he turned it over, his blood ran cold. The photograph showed a younger version of Tommy, maybe 5 years old, standing next to a woman with blonde hair and blue eyes that looked exactly like Emma's. At the bottom, in faded blue ink, were the words, "Tommy and Mommy, Christmas 2019. Robert's hands began to shake as he stared at the photo, because the woman in the picture looked exactly like someone he thought he'd never see again, someone who was supposed to be dead. Robert stared at the photograph until his eyes burned. The woman's face was unmistakable. Sarah Bennett, his first love, the woman whose funeral he'd attended 8 years ago. But the date on the photo said Christmas 2019, 3 years after her supposed death. The rain had stopped, but Robert's mind was still caught in a storm. He walked to his study window and looked out at the Seattle skyline, the city lights blurring through his unshed tears. Emma had finally fallen asleep after hours of talking about the magical dancing boy. It was the first time since her accident that she'd shown genuine excitement about anything. Her laughter had filled the house tonight, a sound he'd thought was lost forever. But now, holding this impossible photograph, Robert felt his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. Sarah Bennett, the woman he'd loved with the desperate intensity of youth, the woman he'd let his family convince him wasn't suitable for a Mitchell. The woman who'd walked away from him with tears in her eyes and dignity intact. He'd been 25 then, fresh out of Harvard Business School, heir to a shipping fortune and drunk on his own potential. Sarah had been 23, a ballet dancer working 3 jobs to afford her tiny Boston apartment. They'd met at a coffee shop where she performed weekend poetry readings to earn extra money. He'd fallen in love with her voice before he'd even seen her face. For 2 years, they'd been inseparable. Robert had loved her with the reckless abandon of someone who'd never truly been denied anything. He'd planned to propose, had bought a ring, had imagined a future filled with her laughter and grace, but his father, William Mitchell, had other plans. "She's not our kind, Robert," he'd said during one of their final conversations. "Think about board meetings, charity galas, family photographs in the society pages. Think about what she'd do to our reputation." The pressure had been relentless. Business associates who questioned his judgment, social events where Sarah was made to feel like an intruder, his mother's polite cruelty that cut deeper than outright hostility. Finally, Sarah had made the choice for both of them. "I can't watch you choose between me and everything you've been groomed for," she'd said that rainy October morning. "We both know what you'll pick eventually. I'm just saving us both the heartbreak." She'd left that day, and Robert had let her go, telling himself it was for the best. Within 6 months, he'd thrown himself into work, building his empire brick by brick, telling himself he'd made the mature choice. 5 years later, her parents had called with the news. Car accident, rainy night. She'd been driving alone, they said. No other family. Robert had attended the funeral from a distance, standing under an umbrella in the back, watching as they lowered the woman he'd never stopped loving into the ground. He'd thrown dirt on her coffin and sworn he'd never love anyone that recklessly again. He'd kept that promise for 8 years. Now he reached for his phone and called Detective Ray Morrison, an old college friend who'd helped him with corporate security issues over the years. "Ray, I need you to run a quiet investigation. A woman named Sarah Bennett supposedly died in a car accident 8 years ago in Boston. I need to know if she really died. Bob, it's past midnight." "What's this about?" "Just, please. And there's a homeless boy, maybe 7 years old, goes by Tommy. He's been sleeping rough near Sacred Heart Hospital. I need to know everything about him. But Ray, absolute discretion. No official channels, no paper trails." After hanging up, Robert opened his safe and pulled out a box he hadn't touched in years. Inside were letters Sarah had written him during their relationship, photographs of happier times, and the engagement ring he'd never had the courage to give her. As he held her letters, one phrase kept echoing in his mind: "I'll always love you, Robert, no matter what happens between us." What if she'd tried to contact him after leaving? What if she'd needed help and he'd missed it? What if the boy dancing in the rain was somehow connected to her? His hands trembled as he began searching through old emails, phone records, anything that might hold a clue. By dawn, Robert had found nothing concrete, but the photograph remained. tangible proof that everything he thought he knew about the past was a lie. The real question was, if Sarah had been alive 3 years ago, where was she now? And why had a child who reminded him so much of her been living on the streets, dancing alone in the rain? When Robert arrived at Miller's grocery the next morning with a bag of warm breakfast sandwiches and hot chocolate, Tommy was already awake. The boy was folding his cardboard shelter with practiced efficiency, every movement economical and purposeful. He moved like someone who'd learned that survival depended on being ready to run at any moment. "Tommy?" Robert called softly, approaching with his hands visible and non-threatening. The boy spun around, instantly alert, muscles coiled for flight. When he recognized Robert, confusion flickered across his features. "Mr. Robert, is Emma okay? Did something happen to her?" The genuine concern in Tommy's voice caught Robert off guard. This child, who had nothing, was worried about someone else's well-being. "She's fine. She wanted me to invite you for breakfast. She's been asking about you since she woke up." Tommy's eyes narrowed with the hard-earned suspicion of someone far too young to be so cynical. "Rich people don't eat breakfast with street kids. What do you really want?" Robert knelt down, bringing himself to Tommy's eye level. "Emma hasn't smiled like she did yesterday since her accident 6 months ago. You gave her something I thought was lost forever. I want to understand how." "I just danced," Tommy said defensively. "I wasn't doing nothing wrong." "I know. Emma sees something special in you, and so do I. Would you consider coming to our house, just for breakfast? No strings attached." For the next 30 minutes, Robert watched as Tommy wrestled with the decision. The boy was clearly hungry. His thin frame and hollow cheeks told that story, but he was also terrified of trusting adults. Robert could see the internal debate playing out across Tommy's expressive face, desperate need warring with learned caution. "If I come," Tommy said finally, his voice small but firm, "and you try to call those government people, I'll run. I'm really fast, and I know places they'll never find me." "No government people," Robert promised solemnly. "Just breakfast with Emma." The drive to Robert's mansion in Bellevue was tense, with Tommy pressed against the car door as if ready to escape at any moment. His eyes darted constantly between the door handle and Robert's hands on the steering wheel. When they pulled through the electronic gates and up the circular driveway, Tommy's breath caught audibly. "You live here?" he whispered, staring at the sprawling Tudor-style mansion with its manicured gardens and fountain. "It's just a house," Robert said gently. "What makes it special is the people inside." Emma was waiting on the front porch in her wheelchair, practically vibrating with excitement. The moment Tommy stepped out of the car, her face lit up like Christmas morning. "Tommy, you came! I made Daddy buy all your favorite breakfast foods, except I don't know what they are. So I made him buy everything." Tommy's defensive posture melted away instantly. For the first time since Robert had met him, the boy truly smiled. Not the cautious half-smile of yesterday, but a radiant expression that transformed his entire face. Over breakfast in the sun-filled dining room, Robert listened as the children talked. Emma told Tommy about her accident, her physical therapy sessions, her dreams of dancing again someday. She spoke with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who'd been forced to grow up too quickly, but also with hope that Robert hadn't heard in months. Tommy shared stories of life on the streets, which gas stations had the cleanest bathrooms, which restaurants threw away the best food, how to stay warm when it rained. He spoke like a survival expert, which Robert realized with growing horror he essentially was. "Where's your family, Tommy?" Emma asked with the directness only children possess. Tommy's face shuttered, all warmth disappearing. "Gone. It's just me now." "What about your mommy and daddy?" "Mommy got sick in her head," Tommy said quietly, staring at his plate. "She'd forget things, forget who I was sometimes. She'd look at me like I was a stranger. One day she forgot so much she forgot to come home." Robert felt something cold and sharp settle in his stomach. "Tommy, what was your mommy's name?" The boy hesitated, glancing between Robert and Emma, as if trying to gauge whether this information was safe to share. Finally, he whispered, "Sarah. Sarah Bennett. She used to be a dancer before I was born." The fork slipped from Robert's hand, clattering against his plate, with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent room. Over the next week, Tommy became a constant presence in the Mitchell household. Robert had convinced him to stay temporarily while they figured out his situation, though he could see the boy remained ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. Tommy slept in the guest room, but kept his few possessions in a backpack by the door, and Robert had noticed him testing the window locks on his first night. What amazed Robert was the complete transformation in Emma. His daughter, who had barely spoken above a whisper since her accident, was now laughing, planning elaborate games, and insisting that Tommy teach her to dance from her wheelchair. The house, which had felt like a mausoleum for months, was suddenly alive with children's voices and laughter. "It's all about the arms and the feeling," Tommy explained patiently, demonstrating graceful movements that Emma could copy from her chair. "Dancing isn't about legs, it's about heart. My mummy taught me that. She said the angels don't have legs either, but they're the best dancers in heaven." Robert watched from the doorway as his daughter attempted the fluid arm movements Tommy showed her. Her face was flushed with concentration and joy, more animated than he'd seen her since before the accident. For the first time in months, Emma looked like a child again instead of a tiny patient. But Tommy remained guarded around Robert. The boy was polite, grateful for the food and shelter, but there was an invisible wall between them that Robert couldn't breach. It was as if Tommy was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Robert to reveal himself as just another adult who would disappoint or abandon him. "He doesn't trust grown-ups," Emma explained when Robert asked about it during one of their father-daughter talks. "He says they always leave or lie or call them mean people. But he trusts me because I'm like him." "How are you like him?" "We're both broken," she said matter-of-factly. "But we're broken in different ways, so when we're together, the broken parts don't matter so much." That afternoon, Robert made a decision that would change everything. He called his lawyer, his private investigator, and his head of security, giving them all the same instruction: find out everything possible about Sarah Bennett's life after she supposedly died. He wanted hospital records, social security activity, anything that could explain how a dead woman had appeared in a photograph with a homeless child. But it was Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who ran the Chinese restaurant behind Miller's Grocery, who provided the first real breakthrough. "That boy, he's good child," she told Robert when he found her that evening, her weathered hands folding wontons with practiced precision. "Very polite, very grateful. His mama, she bring him here 2 years ago. Very sick woman, very sad. Beautiful once, I think, but the sickness, it'd take everything from her." "What kind of sickness?" Mrs. Chen tapped her temple with a flour-dusted finger. "Her mind. She forget things, get confused. Sometimes she not remember the boy at all. She look at him like stranger, ask who he is, why he there. Break my heart, watching that little one try to help his mama remember him." Robert's chest tightened. What happened to her? Mrs. Chen's expression grew sad, her eyes distant with memory. "She collapse here one day, right there by the counter. Ambulance take her away. Boy try to follow, but they say he not family, cannot come. They ask for papers, birth certificates, but he just small child with nothing. He been on street ever since, waiting for her to come back." "Do you know which hospital?" "Sacred Heart. Same place you found him dancing in the rain." "Doctor?" Patricia Vance, Sacred Heart's chief administrator, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the weary expression of someone who'd seen too much human suffering. She pulled out a thick file with obvious reluctance, her fingers drumming nervously, on the manila folder. Mr. Mitchell, what I'm about to share with you is highly confidential medical information. The only reason I'm sharing it at all is because of your substantial contributions to this hospital, and because I believe you genuinely want to help this child. Robert leaned forward in his chair. I understand the sensitivity. Please just tell me what happened to Sarah Bennett. Dr. Vance opened the file, revealing pages of medical notes and photographs. She was admitted 18 months ago with severe early-onset dementia, complicated by what appeared to be drug-induced psychosis. When she arrived, she was in an advanced state of confusion and had no identification. She kept asking for someone named Robert, saying she needed to find him before she forgot everything important. Robert's chest tightened. What exactly did she say? According to the intake notes, she was quite agitated, repeating phrases like, "Robert needs to know about the boy, and I have to tell him the truth before it's too late." But she mentioned having a son, but when social services investigated, they found no record of any children, the boy you've described. There's no documentation of his existence in our system, but he was living with her. Mrs. Chen at the restaurant confirmed it. I believe you, but without proper documentation, birth certificates, custody papers, medical records, he wouldn't have been recognized as her legal child. When she was transferred to our long-term care facility, there was no family listed, no emergency contacts. She became a ward of the state. Robert felt sick. Where is she now? Doctor. Vance's expression grew even more somber. Mr. Mitchell, Sarah Bennett died 6 months ago. The dementia progressed rapidly, as it often does in early-onset cases. In her final weeks, she kept asking about her little dancer and someone named Robert, who would take care of everything when the time came. The room seemed to spin around Robert. Sarah had been alive, had been sick, had died, all while he was building his fortune just miles away. Tommy had been alone on the streets for 6 months, waiting for a mother who would never come home. There's more, Dr. Vance continued, reaching into the file. In her lucid moments, which became increasingly rare, she drew these. She handed Robert a manila envelope filled with sketches. His hands shook as he looked through them. Detailed drawings of a young boy dancing, of a man in a business suit with familiar features, of a little girl in a wheelchair. The artwork was sophisticated, clearly done by someone with formal training. At the bottom of one sketch, in Sarah's familiar, elegant handwriting, were the words, "Robert will understand. Robert will take care of them both. Love finds a way." She drew the wheelchair girl months before you started bringing your daughter here for therapy, Dr. Vance said quietly. The nursing staff found it remarkable. She seemed to know things she couldn't possibly know. Robert stared at the drawings, his mind reeling. How had Sarah known about Emma? How had she known to draw them together? Dr. Vance, I need everything. Sarah's personal effects, her medical records, anything that might help me understand what happened. There wasn't much. Some clothes that the state disposed of, a few letters she never sent, and... She paused, reaching for another document. This might interest you. She had a DNA test done shortly before she died. The DNA test results sat on Robert's desk like a ticking bomb. He'd been staring at them for an hour, unable to process what they meant. The test had been ordered by Sarah herself during one of her final lucid periods, and the results were unambiguous. Tommy was Robert's biological son. The laboratory report included a note from Sarah, written in her deteriorating handwriting, "For Tommy's father, if he's reading this. I'm sorry I never told you. I was afraid you wouldn't want us. But he's yours, Robert. He has your eyes, your stubborn chin, your kind heart. Please love him the way I couldn't teach him to love himself." Robert's hands trembled as he read the accompanying letter. Found among Sarah's possessions. My dearest Robert, if you're reading this, It means my memory has finally failed completely, and Tommy has found his way to you somehow. I always believed he would. That boy has more of you in him than you'll ever know. I need you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I ever did, but I was young and proud and terrified. When I found out I was pregnant 3 months after I left Boston, I wanted to call you 1,000 times. But your mother had made it very clear that I was never to contact your family again, and I thought you were better off without us. I tried to raise him alone, Robert. I did my best, but this sickness in my brain, it's taking everything from me. Some days I don't remember his name. Some days I look at this beautiful, brilliant child and see a stranger. It's killing me by inches, and it's terrifying him. But even as I forget everything else, I remember you. I remember how you used to hold me when I was scared, how you made me believe I was worthy of love. That's what Tommy needs now. Someone to show him he's worthy of love, someone to help him dance again. He's been taking care of me for 2 years, Robert. 2 years. He's 7 years old, and he's been the parent while I've been the child. He deserves so much more than I can give him. I know this is unfair, dropping this truth on you after all these years, but he's yours, and he needs you, and somewhere in my failing mind, I have faith that you'll do right by him. There's something else, something I need you to know, that little girl in my dreams, the one I keep drawing. I see her sometimes when I'm drifting between sleeping and waking. She's connected to Tommy somehow, connected to you. She needs him as much as he needs her. Don't ask me how I know this. Call it a mother's intuition or the ravings of a diseased mind. But trust it. Take care of our son, Robert. Help him remember that he's worthy of love. And tell him his mama loved him even when she couldn't remember his name. All my love, always and forever, Sarah. Robert wiped tears from his eyes as he finished reading. Everything made sense now. Tommy's wariness around adults, his protective instincts toward Emma, his desperate need to dance despite having no safe place to do it. The boy had been carrying impossible burdens for far too long. When Robert finally returned home, he found Emma and Tommy in the living room. Emma was in her wheelchair, and Tommy was teaching her a complex routine that involved both arm movements and chair spins. They were both laughing, completely absorbed in their shared joy. "Daddy!" Emma called out when she saw him. "Look what Tommy taught me!" It's called the butterfly dance, because even if you can't fly, you can still be beautiful. Tommy looked up, and for the first time, Robert saw past the boy's carefully maintained defenses. He saw Sarah's eyes, his own stubborn chin, and something indefinably familiar in the tilt of his head. "Tommy, Emma," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need to tell you both something very important." Tommy instantly went rigid, that familiar wariness returning. "Are you sending me away?" "No, son. I'm never sending you away again." The word son hung in the air, and Tommy's eyes widened with dawning understanding. "Tommy," Robert continued, kneeling down to the boy's level, "your mommy and I loved each other very much a long time ago. Before you were born, before either of us knew how much we needed you. She wrote me a letter before she died, and she wanted me to tell you that you are my son, my real biological son." Tommy stared at him for a long moment, processing this revelation. "You mean you're my daddy? My actual daddy?" "Yes. And I'm sorry it took so long for us to find each other." Emma let out a whoop of joy that could probably be heard 3 blocks away. "I knew it! I told you we were meant to be together! I told you!" "No," but Tommy remained very still, studying Robert's face with an intensity that was both heartbreaking and wise beyond his years. "If you're my daddy, why didn't you come looking for me when Mommy got sick?" The question pierced Robert's heart. "Because I didn't know you existed, son. Your mommy never told me about you. She thought she was protecting us both. But you want me now, even though I'm just a street kid with nothing? Robert pulled Tommy into his arms for the first time, feeling how small and fragile his son was beneath the careful facade of toughness. Tommy, you're not just anything. You're my son, and you're Emma's brother, and you're the most important thing that's ever happened to this family. Tommy buried his face in Robert's shoulder, and for the first time in 2 years, he allowed himself to cry. Not from sadness or fear, but from relief, from hope, from finally being home. "Daddy," he whispered against Robert's shirt, and the word transformed everything. 3 weeks after the DNA revelation, life at the Mitchell mansion had found a new rhythm. Tommy was slowly learning to trust that this wasn't temporary, that he wouldn't wake up one morning to find himself back on the streets. Emma was stronger, happier, and had convinced Robert to install a dance studio in one of the unused rooms where she and Tommy could practice together. But their newfound peace was about to be shattered. Robert was in his home office, reviewing adoption papers his lawyer had prepared, when Janet buzzed him from the main house. "Mr. Mitchell, there are some people here to see you. They say it's about Tommy." Through his office window, Robert saw a black sedan parked in his driveway. 2 people in official-looking suits stood on his front porch, and his blood ran cold when he recognized the woman, Margaret Crawford from Child Protective Services. "Keep the children upstairs," Robert instructed Janet quickly. "Don't let them see what's happening." But as he walked toward the front door, he heard Emma's voice calling down from the landing. "Daddy, who are those people? Tommy's hiding in the closet. He says they're the ones who take kids away." Margaret Crawford was a stern woman in her 50s, with graying hair and the tired expression of someone who'd seen too much human misery. Her companion, a younger man with a clipboard, introduced himself as David Stern from the state attorney's office. "Mr. Mitchell," Margaret began without preamble, "we've received reports that you're harboring an undocumented minor child without proper legal custody. We need to speak with the boy." "Tommy is my son," Robert said firmly. "I have DNA test results proving paternity." "Which means nothing legally without proper custody procedures," David Stern interjected. "The child was living unsupervised on the streets for months. There are protocols, investigations that must be completed, child welfare assessments, home studies, background checks." "This is his home," Robert said, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "I'm his biological father." "Biology doesn't equal legal custody," Margaret replied coldly. "Until the courts determine that placement with you is in the child's best interest, he needs to be placed in protective custody." From upstairs came the sound of Emma's voice, high and desperate. "Tommy, don't hide! Daddy won't let them take you!" But Tommy's response was barely audible. "Yes, they will. They always do." Robert's heart broke at the terror in his son's voice. "Give me 1 week. I'll fast-track every legal requirement you have. But please don't take him from the only family he's ever known." Margaret's expression softened slightly as she looked around the obviously loving home. "Mr. Mitchell, I understand your position, but there are procedures." "The boy has trauma issues," David interrupted, consulting his clipboard. "Street children often do. He needs professional evaluation, therapeutic intervention. The state can provide a group home where he'll be one of 20 kids sleeping on cots," Robert shot back. "Here he has a sister who loves him. Stability, individual attention, private therapy sessions already scheduled." Margaret looked torn. "I'm willing to consider a temporary arrangement, but there would have to be supervised visits, regular check-ins, and you'd need to file formal adoption papers within 48 hours. "Done," Robert said immediately, "and the child would need to consent to staying. If he expresses any desire to leave, we remove him immediately." From upstairs came Emma's voice again. "Tommy, please come out. They're not going to take you. I won't let them." Finally, they heard Tommy's small voice. Promise? I promise. We're family now, and families stick together. Slowly, carefully, Tommy appeared at the top of the stairs, one hand gripping the banister like a lifeline. His eyes were wide with fear, but he was trying to be brave for Emma's sake. "Are you Tommy?" Margaret asked gently, her professional demeanor softening as she looked at the terrified child. Tommy nodded, not trusting his voice. "Do you want to stay here with Mr. Mitchell and Emma?" "Yes, ma'am," Tommy whispered. "Please don't make me leave." "I'll be good, I promise." Margaret exchanged a look with her colleague, then turned back to Robert. 48 hours, Mr. Mitchell. I'll need documentation, character references, medical records, and a full home study completed. If everything checks out, we can discuss a longer-term arrangement. As the officials left, Robert found Tommy and Emma huddled together on the stairs, both children pale and shaken. "It's going to be okay," Robert assured them, pulling both children close. "I'm going to make sure you never have to be afraid of losing this family again." But even as he spoke the words, Robert knew the real battle was just beginning. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Robert's mother, Catherine Mitchell, arrived unannounced in her silver Rolls-Royce. At 72, she was still formidable, with steel-grey hair and eyes that could cut glass. She hadn't visited the house since Emma's accident, claiming the emotional atmosphere was too unsettling. "Robert," she said crisply as she swept into his study, "we need to talk about this situation. If you mean my son, his name is Tommy." Catherine's lips pursed. "Don't be dramatic. I've spoken with the family lawyers. This adoption nonsense could destroy everything your father and I built. The publicity alone—" "Mother, I don't care about publicity." "Well, you should. Mitchell Enterprises' reputation is built on stability, tradition, family values. What will the board think when they discover you've taken in some street child with questionable parentage?" "There's nothing questionable about his parentage. Tommy is my biological son." Catherine waved dismissively. "With that woman, the dancer. Really, Robert, I thought we'd settled this years ago." "Sarah Bennett," Robert said through gritted teeth. "Her name was Sarah Bennett, and she was an incredible woman who raised our son alone while I was playing corporate games. She was trailer trash who saw an opportunity. She was dying," Robert exploded, his composure finally cracking. "She was dying of dementia at 30, alone and confused, while our son lived on the streets because I was too proud and you were too prejudiced to let me love her properly." Catherine recoiled as if slapped. "Lower your voice. The children might hear." "The children have names, Mother. Emma and Tommy, your granddaughter and your grandson. Emma is family. This boy is a complication. Tommy is my son, which makes him your grandson, whether you like it or not." From the doorway came a small voice. "Mr. Robert? Mrs. Catherine? Is everything okay?" They turned to see Tommy standing hesitantly in the doorway, holding Emma's hand. The boy's eyes were wide with concern, and Robert realized he'd heard at least part of their conversation. Catherine looked at Tommy with undisguised coldness. "So, you're the boy causing all this fuss?" Tommy straightened his shoulders, meeting her gaze with dignity beyond his years. "I'm sorry if I'm causing problems, ma'am." "I can leave if you want." "Tommy," Emma said fiercely, "you're not going anywhere. Tell her, Daddy." Robert knelt down and pulled Tommy close. "You're my son, and this is your home. No one gets to make you feel unwelcome here." Catherine's expression softened slightly as she watched the interaction, perhaps seeing something of Robert in Tommy's determined chin. "The boy has manners, at least." "He has much more than that," Robert said. "He has courage, kindness, and more strength than most adults I know." "I can dance too," Tommy added quietly. "I've been teaching Emma. She's really good at it." For a moment, Catherine's mask slipped, and Robert saw a flash of something almost like interest. "You're a dancer? Like your mother?" Tommy nodded. "She taught me before she got sick. She said dancing was how we talk to God when words aren't enough. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, studying Tommy with new attention. "Show me," she said suddenly. "Mother," Robert began, "show me this dancing that's supposedly so important." Tommy looked uncertain, but Emma squeezed his hand encouragingly. "Come on, Tommy, show her the butterfly dance we've been practicing." What followed was 5 minutes of pure magic. Tommy and Emma moved together with perfect synchronization, Tommy's fluid grace complementing Emma's precise arm movements from her wheelchair. They danced as if they'd been partners their whole lives, creating something beautiful from their individual limitations. When they finished, Catherine was very quiet. Finally, she spoke. That was adequate. Coming from Catherine Mitchell, adequate was practically a standing ovation. "Mrs. Catherine," Tommy said politely, "would you like to stay for lunch? We're having grilled cheese and tomato soup. Emma says it's your favorite." Catherine looked startled at being invited so naturally into their family routine. "I suppose I could stay for a short while." As they walked toward the dining room, Robert heard his mother ask Tommy, "Tell me, young man, what else did your mother teach you?" For the first time since she'd arrived, Catherine Mitchell sounded genuinely curious rather than coldly critical. Detective Ray Morrison arrived at Robert's office downtown with a thick folder and a grim expression. They'd been friends since college, and Ray had never looked this troubled about delivering information. "Bob, what I'm about to tell you is going to change everything. Are you sure you want to know this?" Robert set down his coffee cup. "After everything that's happened, I need to know the truth." Ray opened the folder, revealing police reports, hospital records and photographs. Sarah Bennett didn't die 8 years ago. That was staged. Someone with serious resources made her disappear from official records while keeping her alive under a false identity. "What? Who would do that?" "Your father, Bob. William Mitchell had Sarah Bennett's death faked." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. "That's impossible." Ray pulled out a bank statement. Payments to a private investigator, a funeral director, and a doctor who specialized in creating false identities for witness protection, all traced back to accounts controlled by your father. Robert stared at the documents, his world tilting on its axis. Why would he do that? Because Sarah was pregnant when she left Boston. She tried to contact you 6 months after she left, but your father intercepted the letters. He hired people to make sure she never reached you. Ray showed him copies of letters in Sarah's handwriting, dozens of them, addressed to Robert, but never sent. "My dearest Robert," one began, "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I had to try. I'm pregnant. The baby is yours, and I love him already, even though he's barely the size of a pea. I know you have your life, your world that I was never part of, but I thought you deserved to know." "She tried to tell me," Robert whispered. "Your father found out about the pregnancy through the private investigator he'd hired to watch her. He was terrified of the scandal, the impact on the family reputation, so he made her disappear. But the funeral, the death certificate, all fake. Sarah was moved to Seattle under a new identity, Sarah Johnson. Your father's people set her up with a small apartment, a minimal income, but she was essentially trapped. If she tried to contact you or anyone from her old life, the support would disappear." Robert felt sick. "She lived in Seattle all this time, while I was here. Gets worse, Bob. When Tommy was born, she tried to register him under his real name, Thomas Robert Mitchell. Your father's people blocked it. The boy has no legal identity because your father made sure he couldn't be traced back to you. My God." Ray pulled out the final document, a hospital record from Sarah's admission 18 months ago. When Sarah developed dementia, your father's payments stopped. She was alone, confused, with a 6-year-old child and no support system. The apartment was lost, the medical care ended. That's when they ended up on the streets. Robert's hands shook as he processed the implications. "My father let my son live on the streets rather than risk a scandal. There's more. Your father died knowing about Tommy. He had regular reports about Sarah's condition, about the boy's situation. He knew your son was homeless and did nothing. The rage that filled Robert was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. His father had stolen 8 years of his life, 8 years he could have spent with Sarah and Tommy. He'd condemned his own grandson to poverty and abandonment to protect the family name. Bob, there's something else. Child Protective Services. Their visit yesterday wasn't random. Someone tipped them off about Tommy. Who? Ray's expression was grave. The call came from someone at Mitchell Enterprises. Internal number, high-level access. Someone in your own company is trying to have Tommy removed. Robert stood up abruptly, his chair clattering backward. I need to get home, now. Bob, whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking that my family has been under attack for 8 years, and I didn't even know it. But it stops now. As Robert raced toward his car, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You can't protect them forever. Some secrets are too dangerous to keep. A friend. The war for his family was far from over. Robert burst through his front door to find chaos. Emma was crying in her wheelchair while Mrs. Morrison, their housekeeper, tried to comfort her. Tommy was nowhere to be seen. Where is he? Robert demanded. They took him, Emma sobbed. Those people came back with more papers, and they took Tommy away. Mrs. Morrison looked stricken. Mr. Mitchell, there was nothing I could do. They had a court order, said there were new concerns about the boy's safety. Tommy fought them, but... Robert's phone rang. The caller ID showed his mother's number. Robert! Catherine's voice was trembling. I need to tell you something about your father, about what he did. I already know, Mother. Ray Morrison told me everything. Not everything. Catherine's voice broke. I helped him, Robert. I helped your father fake Sarah's death because I thought I was protecting you. The admission hit Robert like a sledgehammer. You knew? You knew I had a son, and you let him live on the streets? I didn't know about the child at first. William told me Sarah was just trying to trap you with pregnancy claims. By the time I realized the boy was real, was actually your son, it had gone too far. William said if the truth came out, it would destroy everything. So you let my son be homeless, rather than admit you made a mistake. I was wrong, Catherine whispered. I was so terribly wrong. But Robert, there's something else. Margaret Crawford from Child Services. She's not working alone. Someone's been feeding her information, manipulating the system to have Tommy removed. Who? Your cousin Bradley. He's been angling for control of Mitchell Enterprises since your father died. If you're distracted by a custody battle, if there's scandal about your illegitimate son, the board might vote to replace you as CEO. Robert's blood ran cold. Bradley Mitchell had always resented Robert's position as heir to the family fortune, but using a child, using Tommy as a weapon, was beyond evil. Where did they take him? Riverside Group Home across town. But Robert, you can't just storm in there. They have legal custody now. If you do anything rash, you'll lose any chance of getting him back. Then what do I do? Catherine's voice strengthened with resolve. We fight. We tell the truth about what your father did, what we all did. We expose Bradley's manipulation, and we bring our grandson home. Robert hung up and turned to Emma, who was watching him with tears streaming down her face. Daddy, you have to get Tommy back. He was so scared. He kept saying he knew this would happen, that good things don't last for street kids. I'm going to bring him home, baby girl, I promise. But even as Robert made the promise, he knew the odds were stacked against them. Tommy was in the system now, and the system was designed to protect children from exactly the kind of family dysfunction the Mitchells represented. His phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Custody hearings can be so unpredictable, especially when certain facts about the family come to light. Still think you can win this? Robert stared at the message, realizing with growing horror that Tommy's removal was just the beginning. Someone was planning to destroy not just his custody chances, but his entire life, and they were using his innocent son as the weapon to do it. Robert's law office had been transformed into a war room. Documents covered every surface, and 3 of Seattle's top family law attorneys huddled around the conference table. It had been 2 days since Tommy's removal, and Robert hadn't slept since. Marcus Webb, his head of security, entered with a grim expression. "Boss, I found the source of the leaks. You're not going to like it. Tell me." "Janet, your personal secretary. She's been feeding information to Bradley for months. Phone logs, appointment schedules, personal conversations she overheard. She's how he knew about Tommy, about the DNA test, everything." Robert felt the betrayal like a knife. Janet had worked for him for 5 years, had been at Emma's bedside after the accident, had helped him through his darkest moments. Why? Bradley promised her a promotion and a $50,000 bonus if she helped him gather evidence of your instability. He recorded conversations, photographed documents, even took pictures of Tommy in the house. Attorney Sarah Weinstein looked up from her legal briefs. "Robert, this is actually good news. If we can prove that Bradley orchestrated Tommy's removal through fraudulent means, we can get an emergency hearing to reverse the custody order." "What do we need?" "Evidence of Bradley's manipulation, proof that the CPS reports were based on false information, and character witnesses who can testify to your fitness as a parent." Robert's phone rang. Dr. Patricia Vance from Sacred Heart Hospital. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm calling because something strange is happening. A man claiming to be a family law investigator came here asking about Sarah Bennett's medical records. He had authorization papers, but something felt off. I wanted to check with you before releasing anything. What did he look like? 40s, expensive suit, very entitled attitude. He kept insisting that he needed the records for a custody evaluation involving Sarah's son." Robert's blood boiled. Bradley was trying to dig up Sarah's medical history to use against Tommy in court. "Dr. Vance, don't release anything to anyone except my authorized attorneys, and thank you for calling." After hanging up, Robert turned to his legal team. "We need to go on the offensive. Bradley thinks he can manipulate the system and destroy my family. He's wrong." Attorney Michael Chen looked up from his laptop. "I've been researching Bradley's background. He's got some interesting financial problems. Gambling debts, failed investments, a bitter divorce where his ex-wife accused him of emotional abuse. If he's planning to take over Mitchell Enterprises, it's probably because he's desperate." "What about Emma?" Sarah Weinstein asked. "How is she handling Tommy's removal?" Robert's heart clenched. "She's devastated. She barely eats, won't leave her room. She keeps asking when Tommy's coming home, and I don't know what to tell her." Marcus spoke up. "Boss, there's something else. I've been monitoring the group home where they placed Tommy. The kid's not doing well. He's not eating, won't talk to the counselors, spends all his time sitting by the window, watching for cars that might be you coming to get him." The image of Tommy waiting by a window, still believing Robert would rescue him, nearly broke Robert's resolve. "How long until we can get a hearing?" "Emergency hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Sarah replied. "But Robert, you need to prepare yourself. The other side is going to attack your character, your fitness as a parent, even your relationship with Emma. They're going to make this ugly. Let them try. I've lost 8 years with my son because of my family's lies and manipulations. I'm not losing another day." Robert's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. But this time, it wasn't a threat. It was a photo of Tommy sitting alone in a sterile group homeroom, staring out the window with tears on his face. Below the photo was a single line, 48 hours until the real battle begins. Are you ready to lose everything? Robert looked around the room at his legal team, his head of security, and the mountain of evidence they'd assembled. Tomorrow would determine not just whether he got Tommy back, but whether his family would survive intact. "We're going to win," he said with quiet determination. "Whatever it takes, we're bringing my son home." But as Robert stared at the photo of Tommy's tear-stained face, he realized that winning in court might not be enough. Tommy had been abandoned too many times, betrayed by too many adults. Even if Robert got him back, healing the damage might take a lifetime. The custody hearing was just the beginning. The real battle would be convincing a traumatized 7-year-old that this time family really meant forever. The King County Family Court was packed as Judge Elizabeth Harper called the emergency custody hearing to order. Robert sat at the plaintiff's table with his legal team, while Bradley Mitchell occupied the gallery behind them, his smug expression barely concealed. Across the aisle, Tommy sat between two social workers, looking impossibly small in clothes that didn't fit properly. When Tommy's eyes met Robert's, the boy's face crumpled with hope and fear. He mouthed the word "Daddy," and Robert had to grip the table to keep from rushing to him. "Your Honor," Bradley's attorney began, "Mr. Robert Mitchell is clearly unfit to care for this child. He has a history of abandoning responsibilities, as evidenced by his 8-year absence from the boy's life. Furthermore, recent investigations have revealed concerning financial irregularities at Mitchell Enterprises that suggest—" "Objection," Sarah Weinstein interrupted, standing. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Bradley Mitchell has orchestrated this entire custody challenge through fraudulent means for personal financial gain." Judge Harper raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Sarah activated the courtroom's display system. "We have recordings of phone conversations between Bradley Mitchell and the plaintiff's former secretary, Janet Morrison, in which Mr. Bradley Mitchell explicitly discusses using the child as a weapon to destabilize Robert Mitchell's control of the family company." The recorded conversation filled the courtroom. Bradley's voice, clear and damning. "Keep feeding me information about the kid. If we can make Robert look unstable, unfit to be a parent, the board will have no choice but to remove him as CEO. A custody battle is perfect. It makes him look irresponsible and puts his judgment in question." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Tommy looked confused, but his social worker was whispering explanations that made his eyes widen with understanding. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, "we have evidence that Bradley Mitchell has been working with certain individuals at Child Protective Services to fabricate concerns about the child's welfare." She presented bank records showing payments from Bradley to Margaret Crawford's personal account, payments that coincided exactly with the dates of CPS visits and reports. Judge Harper's expression darkened. "Are you alleging corruption within the child protective system?" "We're alleging that a desperate man has manipulated the system to achieve personal gain, using a traumatized child as his weapon." Bradley's attorney looked stricken as his client whispered frantically in his ear. But the damage was mounting. "Your Honor," Michael Chen stood, "we also have testimony from Mrs. Catherine Mitchell, the child's paternal grandmother, who wishes to make a full confession about the family's past actions." Catherine Mitchell walked to the witness stand with dignity, though her hands trembled slightly. At 72, she looked every one of her years. "Your Honor, 30 years ago, my husband William Mitchell and I made a terrible decision. We discovered that our son Robert had fathered a child with a woman we deemed unsuitable for our family. Rather than support the relationship, we orchestrated an elaborate deception." The courtroom was dead silent. "We faked the mother's death, relocated her under a false identity, and ensured that Robert never learned about his son. For 8 years, we allowed our grandson to live in poverty and eventually on the streets, rather than admit our mistake." Judge Harper leaned forward. "You're confessing to fraud, conspiracy, and child endangerment?" "Yes, Your Honor. I'm also testifying that my nephew Bradley was aware of these facts and has been using them to manipulate this custody case for his own financial benefit." Bradley shot to his feet. "She's lying. She's senile, desperate to protect her son. Mr. Mitchell," Judge Harper's voice cut like ice. "Sit down immediately, or I'll hold you in contempt." The final blow came when Marcus Webb presented evidence of Bradley's gambling debts, failed business ventures, and desperate financial situation. The man who had portrayed himself as a concerned family member was revealed as a desperate opportunist, willing to traumatize a child for money. Judge Harper reviewed the evidence for what felt like hours, while Tommy sat rigid in his chair, occasionally glancing at Robert with eyes that held too much hope for a 7-year-old to bear. Finally, the judge spoke. "In 30 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such a clear case of system manipulation and child exploitation. The custody order removing Thomas Mitchell from his father's care is hereby reversed immediately." Tommy's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Furthermore," Judge Harper continued, "I'm ordering an immediate investigation into the actions of all parties involved in this fraudulent custody challenge. Mr. Bradley Mitchell, you will remain in this courtroom to answer questions from the district attorney's office." As the gavel fell, Tommy broke free from his social workers and ran across the courtroom into Robert's arms. Father and son collided with desperate intensity, both of them sobbing with relief. "Daddy, you came for me," Tommy whispered against Robert's shoulder. "I knew you would. I told them you'd come. Told them." "I will always come for you," Robert promised, his voice thick with emotion. "Always. You're my son, and nothing will ever separate us again." Later that evening, back at home, Robert found Tommy and Emma in the newly completed dance studio. Emma was in her wheelchair, and Tommy was teaching her a routine that incorporated both their abilities. They moved together with perfect synchronization, creating something beautiful from their individual challenges. "We've been practicing all week," Emma announced proudly. "Tommy choreographed it himself. It's called Finding Home." Dun! As Robert watched his children dance together, his daughter who couldn't walk and the son he'd nearly lost, he understood what Sarah had tried to tell him in her final letter. Love really did find a way. Despite his father's cruelty, despite years of separation and trauma, despite a system designed to protect children that had been corrupted for personal gain, they had found each other. Tommy broke away from the routine and walked to Robert, taking his hand with the simple trust of a child who finally believed in permanent love. "Daddy," he said quietly, "do you think Mommy can see us now?" Robert knelt down, looking into eyes that held Sarah's warmth and his own determination. "I think she's been watching over us all along, son. I think she's the reason we found each other." "And I think she's happy," Emma added, rolling her wheelchair closer to complete their family circle. As they stood together in their dance studio, surrounded by mirrors that reflected their love back at them infinitely, Robert finally understood the true meaning of wealth. It wasn't the money in his accounts or the company bearing his name. It was this: a son who danced with angels, a daughter who refused to let anything dim her light, and the second chance to be the father they both deserved. Outside, Seattle's skyline glittered in the evening light, but inside the Mitchell home, 3 hearts beat in perfect rhythm. A family that had been broken by pride and fear, but healed by love and the determination to never let go of each other again. Tommy took Robert's hand and Emma's, and together they moved in a simple dance of gratitude, 3 souls finally home where they belonged.